The chess speaks for itself. Wait, actually, no, it's Hans who speaks for himself as he responds to the allegations and all of the drama in his interview today. We're going to briefly discuss that interview as well as just the general discussion at play. After that, we will talk about today's games, including Niemann against Dominguez and Mamedyarov against Caruana. This interview is on the St. Louis Chess Club YouTube channel, so if you're interested in learning more about that, I'll post the link to that interview in the description, although it is a long one, so I will try to briefly recap a few of the key points that have gone on in that interview and in the discussion as a whole. So in that interview, he states that he has not cheated in an over-the-board game, although he does admit to having cheated in online games in the past. And again, for all of the details about exactly what he means by that, I would suggest you check his interview. Another key point is that he describes that he is saying that he was especially well prepared for that game because he did just so happen to check out the line of the opening that happened in that game. And so one of the questions in the chess community is some people are wondering, did Magnus Carlsen's team potentially leak opening prep? That is a discussion that has been discussed by some of the seconds on Carlsen's team, and they think that it is unlikely that that has occurred. And again, on this topic, if you want, you can check out the Niemann interview where he goes through exactly the sort of move order transposition, because there was this whole discussion where Hans Niemann cited a game. That game didn't technically exist, but he still, there was one kind of similar, so there's an argument about whether that's the same thing or not. And then Niemann says just in general, this is a line that he would prepare for because it is a potential transposition. Another point that has been discussed is the question of the level of analysis. Some people have said that they find Hans Niemann's level of analysis in the post-game interview not up to par with his playing strength. And so there's a question of a discrepancy there. And this is something that Hans Niemann says, that it's just kind of the way that it is, that after the game, maybe you don't entirely, you don't have the same energy levels, or that another thing was that one of the big moves that he played in his game against Firouzja yesterday, this wild piece sacrifice that we discussed in the video for the previous round's game, he described that is that even though he wasn't able to give the most correct, concrete lines, justifying this in the interview, that he played this during the game as an intuitive idea, that he wanted to sacrifice the piece. He felt intuitively that it made sense and that it would be a strong attacking move to put Firouzja under pressure. One of the top chess trainers, and by top chess trainers, I mean top chess trainers of the top chess players, Jakob Aagaard, and he has described, as someone who has worked with Hans Niemann specifically on calculation, so that the two of them have worked together. He has helped train Niemann, and he does not personally find any foul play. He doesn't have any suspicions of foul play by Niemann. So that's just another perspective, and I will link the article that he wrote in the description as well. With all of that said, let's get into today's games. In the game between Dominguez and Niemann, we see an Italian, which is also what Niemann played as white against Firouzja in the previous round. Both sides developing so far. A6 gives room for the bishop to drop back, as does A4 for white, also giving their bishop room to drop back. Bishop just goes back voluntarily because often it's going to get kicked by one of the pawns that white could push at it anyway. Both sides continue to develop, H3 and H6, taking control over these squares. Rook E1, centralizing the rook. Now knight E7, a common maneuver bringing the knight over to the king side. Bishop drops back to B3, again getting out of the way of any pushes. Now Hans decides to play C5, a very committal decision, but the idea is that you're gaining more space. You do weaken the D5 square significantly because you can't have a pawn control that square anymore, but you do gain more center control. Dominguez now maneuvers his knight around to E3 to potentially take advantage of that hole on D5 and hopefully hop a knight in there. Niemann plays queen D7. Now Dominguez just plays bishop D2, just slightly improving the bishop by getting it off the back rank. Niemann plays rook D8, A5, kind of freezing down at Niemann's queen side at this pawn. If it pushes, white will take, and then we'll have access to the A6 pawn. Niemann plays bishop B8, which is a bit of an inaccuracy, and it looks kind of weird to put your bishop shut it into your own pawn, and it does turn out that the bishop would have actually been better on A7, and it's going to come back there later on anyway, but at the same time, it's not like the bishop looked any better on A7, but the point is that eventually it is going to open up with the way that Dominguez played. Speaking of the way that the Dominguez plays, how would you play in this position? So the best plan is to start with bishop A4, kicking away the queen. Queen has to go back, and then play C4. Now both sides have locked up this central pawn structure. So you have this incredibly closed position, but the key difference is that white's bishops are better. Specifically, white's light squared bishop is not shut in behind their central pawns, while black's dark squared bishop is shut in by their central pawns. So that is going to give white a significant advantage in this type of position. Even just one piece that's better placed than the opponent can be enough for an edge. Even plays knight g6. Now Dominguez goes to d5. The knight is traded off. Bishop d7 comes back. And now what would you do here? So the way for white to make progress here is that you need to open up the position. And b4, this is the perfect time to do so, because when they take, you're able to play this rook c1 move. The rook takes advantage of the queen's awkward placement on c8. Niemann trades off these bishops. There's a counterattack on your queen, so white takes back. And then the queen has room to move to safety. Dominguez trades queens, and we go into this endgame. For a second, white's down a pawn, but white will regain the b4 pawn. Niemann plays bishop a7, so finally we see that the bishop would indeed be much stronger on this diagonal, and so Niemann basically wasted 2 moves by having to move the bishop back and forth. Dominguez plays bishop e3. These bishops get traded off. He actually takes with the f-pawn to give himself more central control, anticipating Niemann's idea of playing f5, trying to give himself a little more space. Then this trade happens. Rook comes to b1. Now maneuvering the knight over, e4 played to defend the d5 pawn. Niemann brings the king towards the center. White finally decides it's time to take that pawn. It's been sitting there for long enough. You can see that white has a pleasant position here because white's pieces are all more active than black's. White's rooks are the one attacking b7, while black's rooks are stuck defending. At the same time, it's going to be difficult to turn this position into the full point. White plays knight f3. Niemann goes knight a7. Now, Dominguez chooses to play d4, which makes a lot of sense. You're trading off your doubled pawn. g6. Rook comes up to b3, potentially looking for a rook f3 soon. Niemann plays king g7, improving the king. h4, getting a little bit of space. Niemann plays knight b5. What would you do? This move was where Dominguez threw away all of his chances. White has really good winning chances if you keep the knight on the board, because this knight on e6 is going to be incredibly strong. It might look difficult to break through because black does have the strong knight on b5, but the rook endgame is going to be basically just a dead draw, so you needed to keep the knights on the board. And one actually pretty cool line would have been if black tries to keep the king forward, which is what you'd want to do in the game. You'd want to run this king towards the center with king e5. But now white has the really cool move, knight back to f8. You're attacking the g6 pawn, and you're attacking this rook. Black is in trouble. Instead of that, if you're forced to run away with your king, now white plays rook c4. White's pieces are looking to enter the position. And again, there's maybe not an immediate breakthrough, but you can see that white still, all of their pieces are more active than black's. The problem was that when white trades off these knights, and then he could have taken on b5, that might have been a better chance to continue the game. After rook f3, he avoids the trade of rooks. Now if you take here, you're dropping your e4 pawn. So white first brings the king to the center, but this gives black time to activate their rook with rook c2. And having the active rook here will finally give Niemann drawing chances. Because yeah, I mean, he spent this whole game incredibly passive, but now he's finally managed to get his rook into the game. Rook comes down to c1, gives some checks, and they're going to repeat the position here. Today, we're going to feature another game because the clash of Mamedyarov versus Caruana was absolutely wild. Mamedyarov plays d4, and we're going to see a Rogozin opening chosen by Fabiano. That's with this early bishop b4 combined with d5. Mamedyarov trades, plays bishop f4. And basically, one of black's main ideas is that they already have a lot of pressure on the c3 knight, although white is able to keep that solidified with the rook on c1. Fabi plays queen e7. Knight comes back to d2, challenging the knight on e4, so the trades, bishop a3, rook moves over, Fabi castles. After e3, Fabi starts to play this like an absolute madman. He plays g5. g5. Now, he lost the game against Wesley So earlier in the tournament by playing a g5 move and paying the price for weakening his position. Here, though, after the bishop attack, now comes f5, and all of a sudden, Fabi is generating a huge attack while white's king is in the center, with f4 coming, threatening to just trap this bishop. The bishop hops over to e5. Knight c6 attacks the bishop. So now Mamedyarov is the one who plays f4, trying to solidify that bishop in. Now the knights are traded. f4. Fabi's just trying to steamroll Mamedyarov's position. Fabi is hoping to open this f-file before Mamedyarov can castle in order to keep his king in the center and have a huge attack. So how would you play this as white? Technically, the move bishop e2 is more accurate for white, and this is the one that could have retained some winning chances for Mamedyarov. But this move bishop d3 that was played by Mamedyarov, the game ends up in an equal position, but it still required some incredible calculation from Mamedyarov to even believe that he would survive this attack. Because here comes pawn takes e3, the knight has to go back to f1, and this is what we're talking about. White's king is completely stuck in the center. This rook is not in the game, and black has total control of this open file. Fabi tries to open up the position even more with the move c5. Now Mamedyarov is able to grab this pawn, but these trades come. Bishop e4 check. The king has to walk up to king e2. The delayed move 20 bong cloud is played by Mamedyarov. Now Fabi plays queen f7. What do you do? Fabi has two ginormous threats. First, we've got queen f2. That would be a checkmate. Next, we also have queen h5, which is also going to lead to checkmate. The only way to survive both of those is queen to g1, preventing queen f2. And if you go queen h5 check, there's this move g4. Now, another possibility, you might consider bishop takes h7 with the idea that now if you take with the queen, we've distracted your queen away, we can take on b4. But the problem is that your king is still going to be in trouble. Even just a move like b6, now black is looking for chances to give checks all over the place with all of their pieces, and white would be in big danger. So indeed, queen g1 is the move. Now Fabi plays bishop c3, going after the d4 pawn. After rook f1, a whole bunch of simplifications occur. Black takes here. White actually has a choice. White could take with the knight or with the queen. It looks really weird to take with the queen, but the point is that if you take this way, now black's attack continues. It rages on. There's bishop g4 check. King has to walk up even further. Now rook f4 comes. Bishop takes d4 is a huge threat, which about to win your queen. The only way to survive that is bishop takes h7. King takes to give your king room on d3 to escape. After rook c8, knight g3, rook c4. Black's pieces are all incredibly active. There's a rook and a bishop for the queen, but I mean, black's position is just so much more active. The rook on h1 isn't playing, so this would definitely have been a scary one to play. And so understandable that Mamedyarov just wants to take back with the queen to lead this game into an endgame where he's not going to get mated. So this is all what happens. Basically, the game just simplifies down from here. In this sort of opposite colored bishop position, the game is very likely to be a draw, especially as the rooks are traded off quite quickly. And now in this opposite colored bishop endgame, even though Fabi is up a pawn, there really is just no hope for winning, because with the opposite colored bishops, white will be able to create a blockade on the light squares, as that is the color of their bishop. So the game was drawn 10 moves later. Okay, today's games were all drawn, and our standings are just as confusing now that Carlsen has left. Basically, again, with Carlsen having left, all of the games he plays don't count. So it's like you just didn't play a game, which is why people are kind of having played a different number of games. Everyone with the yellow dot next to their name, I apologize, that's not the best way to represent this, but it's what we got. They have played one fewer game. So that basically means they're in a better position. So for instance, Nepo has only played 4 games, while Fabi has played 5 games. So even though they're on the same point total, Nepo is in a better situation because he'll get to play one more game than Fabi will, heading into the rest of the tournament. Okay, starting from the top, we've got So with 3 points, Nepo with 2.5, Fabi with 2.5, Dominguez 2.5, Niemann 2.5, Firouzja and MVL at 2, Aronian and Mamedyarov at 1.5. And just to list it out, Nepo, Niemann, Firouzja, Aronian, and Mamedyarov are the people with 1 fewer game so far.